How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Is there a performer that has never been involved with the Muppets, like on the Muppet Show or wherever, that you think would be like a perfect kind of who would play really well with the Muppets, who would like just be a perfect counterpoint to the Muppets? Like, who would be a good guest star on the Muppet Show? That's someone who was never on there. Because for some reason, I thought of this the other day and someone popped into my head immediately. I think it's because I was watching the Muppet Show probably, but I started thinking other people that like have never been on the Muppets that I wished would have been on the Muppets.
I don't know like who all has been on there and who hasn't. Like I didn't see the newer Muppet Show.
Well, just think of like the original. Well, the newer Muppet Show is not like variety show style, so that doesn't really.
They did like the variety / talk show thing at least one more time.
Well,
with
there
Muppets
was the Jim
Tonight.
The Muppets Tonight, but that was still we're not quite the same. It was,
That's what I'm saying. It's not the same, but it's the closest to the original form.
Sure, yeah, more than like the Muppet Show that was trying to be The Office or Muppets Now, which was just weird.
Yeah.
But like someone who could come on as like a guest star and do skits with the Muppets, like who would be great?
I'll be honest. I would love to see someone like Stephen Wright or Tig Notaro, someone with like a super dry delivery.
Yeah. No, I like that. Mitch Hedberg.
But like like almost nose to nose with someone like Sam the Eagle.
Yeah, okay.
And just saying things back and forth, like trying to get the other one to laugh.
Do you see Stephen Wright doing a musical number? Tig, I could see doing it, but
I think Tig would be fun. I think Tig would be a lot of fun.
What about you, Gary? What you got anyone?
I mean, like the immediate people that I thought of when you first said it were people like Seth Rogen or Danny McBride.
Yeah, because they are basically Muppets.
Yeah. Like both those guys, I think would be.
Yeah. If they were like a modern revival of the Muppet Show in the original format, which honestly is what Disney should do and stop trying to reinvent the wheel. Just bring back the same format. Both of those guys would be perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone in Paul Rudd, like anyone in that like realm of Judd Apatow like comedy. Paul Rudd actually would be great.
Yeah, he would be fantastic with the Muppets. He would totally nail it.
That would be the highlight of his life. Like I can just picture him just having a ball on the Muppet Show.
Another name outside of those two that did pop into my head for whatever reason, I just think he would interact well, would be like Idris Elba.
Yes.
That would be good. He's got a good sense of humor. Like he's very serious and handsome. He's got this great voice, but it's like he can be pretty funny. I mean, look at him on The Office, and his
well that's exactly what I was thinking of was like The Office and I was picturing he'd be really good and like he could probably sing. I don't know.
I bet he could sing. I bet he seems like he's a multi-talented guy. I bet he's got.
He'd be like having Christopher Reeve on the old Muppet Show, like just having just like a stud, just guy on there for Miss Piggy to get.
Miss Piggy would be so wet for Idris Elba.
That's true.
Oh my God! Let's go ahead and clip that audio.
If only they could be Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell would be fun.
Bruce Campbell would be great.
Yeah,
he's pretty
much a Muppet too.
Yeah. The person I thought of, and it's because their partner, their spouse, was on the Muppet Show, and I was like, why has this person never been on there? I mean, not now because they're past, but Gene Wilder. How was Gene Wilder?
Oh yeah.
How was Gene Wilder never on the Muppet Show? Gilda was. I think it was season 5.
Gilda was.
I think Gilda was in the last season, but Gilda Radner, who was married to Gene Wilder, was on there and great. But like Mel Brooks, like they're in that whole realm. So how did Gene Wilder? Surely he got asked, right? Maybe they're like, I feel like that's someone that you have to ask to be on the Muppet Show, and maybe it just didn't work out due to scheduling or whatever.
Yeah.
He just seems too perfect, and he would have been huge in that era when the Muppet Show was on.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, when you're watching Idea Man, I was like skimming through it again, and they talk about it at a certain point. There were like just not enough episodes to do all the people that.
Oh yeah, everybody wanted to be on it. There was a waiting list.
I feel like also if you have some sort of, if you're known for one thing, but you can also sing and dance.
Well, Gene Wilder can sing and dance.
Well, I'm just saying, no, I know he can. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of like the criteria that you're looking for is like somebody who, I mean, it's mostly acting, but somebody who has a really good sense of humor about life in general, but also themselves and being able to really have fun and cut loose. But also, if you've got at least a little bit of singing and dancing, hell, even if you were like, I was in choir in high school or something like that, or if your singing is not horrible, then you can hang with the Muppets. It feels like.
Yeah, but then you also had like that Russian ballet dancer.
Yeah,
and then you had like Mummenschanz, like that, those like Swedish performance artists that were on, I think the first season, maybe season 2. I think it was the first season though, who wear masks the whole time and never even speak.
Yeah.
So like they did some weird shit.
Well, in that instance, bring on Slipknot, but have them not play music. Just go around doing skits like in the masks and the jumpsuits. Yeah.
Nobody wants to see Slipknot in the Muppet Show. Anyway.
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. This is the last podcast you'll ever need about the Great Muppet Caper. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Hort.
Hey, I'm co-host Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you for joining us for part 5 of our coverage of the films of Jim Henson in our series we've titled Heartfelt, The Legacy of Jim Henson.
Ah, lovely. Thank you, fellas.
Yeah, I can't help but feeling like thinking about the one person out there who's been just like, man, I need another podcast about the Great Muppet Caper, or has sought out podcasts about the Great Muppet Caper before and been like, I've been left unfulfilled. And that
there are many.
Today we're bringing it to you.
And you know what? You'll never need to look for another one again, because anything you ever want to know about that movie, I guarantee you we have found it all. If it's out there, we have found it. Maybe
and
more than you want to know about it.
I was going to say, even some stuff that you wouldn't have thought to want to know about this movie.
You're going to learn. That's the thing. So when the Muppet movie was released in the summer of 1979, it was, as we discussed on our last episode, an enormous success, popular with both audiences and critics. The Muppets at this time were some of the most popular entertainers in the world, and Jim Henson was in a position to do almost anything that he wanted as his next project, so long as that anything involved the Muppets. But if there's one thing that we've learned over the course of this series, it's that Jim Henson does not like to be pigeonholed. You know, he didn't want to be known as just a children's entertainer, despite the success of Sesame Street. He didn't want to be just known as the puppet guy, despite his early successes with puppets on television. And now he found himself wanting to be something more than just, the guy who does the Muppets. He loved the Muppets, of course, and he was still going strong on the Muppet Show and on Sesame Street. But he had other artistic ambitions as well, other projects that he wanted to work on, some of which didn't involve the likes of Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy, and Fozzie Bear.
And props where it's due. Imagine how big your balls are when your movie just killed, you've got the hottest show on TV, and something like Kermit the Frog, your creation, is a household name all over the world.
And you're like, let's do something else.
Yeah, people would kill to be pigeonholed with that. So then Jim's like, nah, never mind.
Nah, let's do something weird.
Yeah. And I will say it's worth mentioning here, I guess, and we'll dig in some in this episode, but I'm sure more down the road. This is where, like, when you're reading stories about Jim Henson after the Muppet Show or the Muppet movie came out, is where you start to see him get like more, like, I hate to say out of control, but for Jim Henson, I guess it was.
Yeah.
You start seeing more stories about how after the movie, it really kicked in that he couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. And he started getting more into, like, I don't know, like he was getting a little bigger, like just it is attitude too. Not like he was a dick, but like just he started getting a look, like they called it, like a California cowboy chic.
Yeah,
like
wearing white suits and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And of course then he's also just still burning the candle at both ends, flying back and forth from New York to London all the time. Even on down weeks, he'd planned like Muppets at some event.
Yeah, like we're gonna go perform for the Queen of England because we got a week off.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally. Yeah.
And his family says he'd like have like maybe one day of the week that's supposed to be his down week or down day that he can crash, and he would often just be really sick and just the very next day just be like back out on the road again,
Yeah.
and doing something. You could start to see the strain, or you start to hear stories about like what he's doing there, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, he's doing so much at once. And like, even, as we'll discuss this over the course of this episode, but like while he's working on this movie, he's got multiple projects in the air, like big projects in the air at once. And we're going to try to focus just on the production of this movie, but he is working on things simultaneously. We're just going to kind of try to streamline these stories so that we can talk about one at a time and dedicate an episode to each one. But he was like, if you thought he was doing a lot in these previous episodes we talked about, like juggling multiple things at once, that is nothing compared to what he starts doing in the early 80s.
Yeah, we're at a spot where like somebody could slow down. He's only building momentum. Like he's just snowballing into more and more stuff. I will say also, I think around this time was where he started to develop that love for cars, because Lord Grade.
He had always had a love for cars, because when he graduated college from the University of Maryland, he had a Rolls Royce that he had bought with some of his early Muppet money that he'd made off Sam and Friends and off his commercials, and he took a Rolls Royce to his college graduation. And then when the Muppet Show hit, he bought a Lotus.
Well, I was going to say, I actually read that Lord Grade gave him that Lotus.
Yeah, Lord Grade got it customized and stuff for him. So it may have been a gift, but yeah, but it's because Jim was already into cars before that. I mean, he had already purchased a Porsche, I think, before this as well. Like he was just a car guy.
Yeah. Well, and if you haven't seen it, it's a 1978 Lotus Eclat. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, I think so.
And it was green, and they had Kermit eyes put on the headlights, like pop up out of the hood. And
those eyes didn't last very long, I don't think. I don't think they were street legal, but
well, and fun fact, I read Carol Spinney tells a story. Like if you look at the archives, they say this happened later, but with Carol Spinney, who apparently rode in the car with him, so I want to believe Carol Spinney, but says that the day that Jim Henson went to pick up the car, it wasn't there because it had been stolen, and somebody used it in a bank robbery. and they used it in a bank robbery, and then it was easily found because
it's the car that looks like Kermit the Frog. Yeah, it's Kermit.
That's the little Muppet short movie that needs to take place, is like a bunch of like the bad guy Muppets planning a robbery with Jim Henson's car. It's the most standout car.
Well, I was reading that and I was like, did that have anything to do with the Great Muppet Caper? Like him being interested in this robbery stuff? Like, I don't know, but it was a neat little story, I thought.
So even before he had set out to make the Muppet movie, the first Muppet movie in 1979, Jim had entered the early stages of a collaboration with a fantasy artist by the name of Brian Froud. Now, this was going to be an original fantasy story that was going to push the boundaries of what puppetry could do, with Froud creating an entire world and its inhabitants from the ground up. Whereas the Muppet movie had taken the Muppets into the, quote unquote, real world where they interacted with a human cast, this new project that he was envisioning would be a totally fictional world, one where every single inhabitant would be a puppet. So no humans at all, which had never been done.
Some might say that's the world we live in today.
So Jim knew that this project was going to be considerably more expensive and considerably more risky than the Muppet movie had been. After unsuccessfully pitching the movie to Paramount, Jim approached Lord Lou Grade about financing it. And Grade, of course, had been instrumental in getting the Muppet movie and the Muppet Show off the ground. And Jim figured that since Grade had made a nice little profit off of the Muppet movie, he'd be more than willing to roll the dice on Jim's next project. But Jim's producer, David Laser, he wasn't so sure that this was the right move. Like he knew that Grade was eager to get another Muppet movie off the ground sooner rather than later, hoping to ride on the momentum of the Muppet movie's success. So Laser convinced Jim that another Muppet-led movie was the best move. And then he was able to convince Jim to let him negotiate with Lord Grade personally. And Laser promised Jim that if he agreed to make a sequel to the Muppet movie first. He's like, if this is it, let's do this before we do anything else. Let's make another Muppet movie. Let's ride this wave while it's strong. And if we do this, then I'm going to make sure that any funding that Lord Grade puts up for the Muppet sequel would be contingent on Grade also financing this fantasy film that you want to make. Pretty good deal. And it sounded like a pretty good deal to Jim. He wasn't thrilled about delaying the fantasy film because he was just like really eager and really excited to do it. But he also knew that delaying it would give him and Brian Froud more time to develop the project. So that's just more stuff that they could develop down the line. And when Laser spoke to Lord Grade, the producer was able to convince him to put down $14 million for the Muppet sequel, which is nearly twice what the first movie had cost. Grade also agreed to put an additional $13 million towards Jim's as yet unnamed fantasy film.
I feel like you're treating the Dark Crystal like Voldemort.
They haven't named it. I'm not naming it yet because they haven't named it yet. They don't even know.
Okay.
They don't have a story. They don't got jack shit at this point, other than they know that they want to make a fantasy movie together.
Yeah, this is a fun part of Jim's story. You're getting a lot of full creative directing. Not everybody's gonna love that you did it, except Lord Grade, I guess. He just seems to hand out money left and right.
Well, not quite, but yeah. I mean, he's making money back on it too, though.
Yeah, that's true.
And so with all of their funding in place, Jim began to work on a sequel to the Muppet movie, a film that would come to be known as the Great Muppet Caper.
This is the most fabulous diamond of them all, the legendary baseball diamond. And this would be the most sensational heist of the century if it weren't for...
Ta-da! Announcing the Great Muppet Caper!
the glamorous nightclub, and the fun begins.
Mickey, that's my new receptionist dancing out there.
She's sensational.
A hired car.
I can only take you as far as the lobby.
A backstage romance, and the jealousy begins. A brilliant strategy,
We're gonna have to catch those thieves red-handed. What color are their hands now?
and the adventure begins. In the Great Muppet Caper.
Starring everybody and me.
Now, we'll be discussing the second movie in detail here. We're not irresponsible parasites, but we had to bring you into the podcast outline in case you haven't seen the movie and perhaps have no prospect of ever watching it. You'll be grateful to know we'll still cover the development of the film, the writing of the script, filming in London and Los Angeles, details about the cast and cameos, as well as some of the more intricate shots. And certainly we'll be reading some bad reviews which are not to be trusted. I wouldn't even put it past me to present some fun facts about the most valuable and largest jewel, the fabulous baseball diamond. Now, I don't know why Fozzie's bow tie is always crooked. Still in all, this is our podcast.
That is the weirdest spoiler. Was there even a spoiler warning in there?
I was about to say, did it just feel like Todd was replaced with AI?
It felt that way.
It's really hard to be on the tail end of a really nasty cold and try to have even the cadence of Dame Diana Rigg.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of what I was going for there.
Well, congrats, I suppose.
Thanks.
So, whereas Jim was forced to let a more seasoned film director helm the Muppet movie, this time around, there was no question as to who would direct the film. It was going to be Jim Henson himself. I don't really think Lord Grade ever even raised the issue. Almost like it was just a given. Like he just knew, hey, this time around, Jim's going to direct it. I know they're going to ask for it, so I'm not even going to bring it up. Not even going to breach the subject. Grade also agreed that Jim could shoot the two movies back to back, with the fantasy movie going into production just as soon as the Muppet sequel wrapped, which meant that pre-production on the fantasy film and on the Muppet sequel would often overlap.
And can we just pause on that for just a second? Because Jim stepped into the director's chair solo for the first time, which feels like a big deal. And like you said, that you can't find anywhere where anybody had a problem with it this time. And I guess because of the success of the Muppet movie or whatever.
Yeah. It's hard to argue against it because even though he wasn't the director on the Muppet movie, like he had a say in every single scene that made it to the screen in that movie. He was on set for everything. Every decision that was made in that movie went through Jim Henson, even though he wasn't the quote unquote director. He was still the number one creative decision maker on that movie, I would say.
I also feel like this movie, especially right at the top, it has really big first movie energy. Like I was looking at it, juxtaposed with the Muppet movie, and the Muppet movie really does come across like the secret origin of, and this is like chapter one, or like these characters are playing other characters in a story. It's kind of fun to see that, well, they got to the rich and famous contract and now they're making movies like this one that you're watching right now. And it's where we've cast ourselves as Kermit and Fozzie are identical twins, which that alone is hilarious. But we're investigative journalists trying to figure out this jewel heist thing in another country. Like, it feels like big first movie energy. And to be honest, it's funny if you go back through some of the movies that we've talked about before, where someone is doing something they have no business doing, like a reporter or a student investigating a murder or something like that. It's like, why is this person doing this? But in this instance, you have a bear and a frog that are identical twins working as reporters, investigating a jewel heist. And at one point, Kermit even says, and we'll catch those jewel thieves for you. It's like, why? You're reporters from America. You have no business doing this. It's just kind of a throwaway logic, whatever. but I buy into it, and but that's all coming back to say, like, with the opening and that first musical number, hey, a movie, it has that big first movie energy.
Yeah, I would not try to apply too much logic to a Muppet movie in general. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. The part I keep coming back to on all this too, just like where you're talking about going into pre-production here and I know we're obviously gonna talk about the Dark Crystal eventually. I just can't stop thinking about, imagine Jim Henson has one foot in Muppet worlds with Kermit and the other in like a creepy puppet fantasy with this, like Lord of the Rings meets a taxidermist fever dream or something. And he's just like, he's overlording all of this shit. And it feels like Luke Grade's out there with his monocle in, and he's just like, yes, fuzzy savior, take my money and run. But he's doing like these back-to-back films. It's like more than ambition at this point. It's like hard snorting puppet glitter off a stripper's ass and screaming, I'll sleep when I'm dead.
Well, that's his thing. I mean, we always talk, we've talked a lot about that during this. He works as if he's running out of time. And unbeknownst to him, he is running out of time. Because less than a decade after the release of this movie, he's going to be dead. And if you look at pictures of Jim Henson when he's...
Spoiler.
What? I think everyone listening to this knows that Jim Henson died 35 years ago.
Wait, what?
But if you look at pictures of Jim Henson, closer to his death when he's like in his early 50s, he looks at least a decade older than he actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like when somebody becomes president.
Yeah. It feels like that happened to Jim Henson because he was working himself ragged, but in the meantime, he did put out multiple classics that will live forever. So if he was working to create a legacy, he certainly did so, even if he didn't get to do everything that he had probably hoped to do. Now, Jim's first order of business was to hire a screenwriter to write his Muppet sequel. Once again, he looked to someone outside of the regular Muppet talent pool, someone who could bring their own set of skills to the movie. And the guy that he ended up going with was a veteran comedy writer named Jack Rose, who had gotten his start writing gags for Milton Berle and Bob Hope before moving on to screenplays. The first of which was Road to Rio, which was one of those classic Bob Hope, Bing Crosby road movies that Jim loved so much, which had, of course, inspired the Muppet movie. And Rose would be working alongside Jim's longtime writer, Jerry Jewell, on this script.
Jack Rose, you beautiful fucking dinosaur. That he was slinging one-liners since the dawn of time. It's such a weird, I don't know why, but like him teaming up with Jerry Jewell, and I don't know how Jerry Jewell felt about that. I don't remember reading for sure, but he's been handling the Muppet dialogue since the beginning. He's basically like the Muppet whisperer.
He knows the minds and he knows these characters inside and out. So he's the one who can take whatever jokes or plot devices that Jack Rose comes up with and make sure that they fit the Muppets, because he is like the guy that Jim trusted to know the Muppets as characters more than anyone else.
It felt like a curveball, but I guess with you saying he would have been a fan in that way, I guess maybe this is just an opportunity for him to get to work with him or something. But yeah, either way, I'm in. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from what I found, it looks like some of those early bits were probably the stuff that was used in like the Academy Awards ceremonies. I actually saw that his first credit was the Academy Awards ceremony from 1955. Great Muppet Caper looks to be his last narrative project he worked on before returning to write on the 54th, 55th, and 60th Academy Award ceremonies in the 80s.
Well, he also did a lot of radio stuff
Mm.
for Milton Berle and Bob Hope.
Yeah, and I know those guys probably, guys like that hosted those ceremonies most of the time.
Yeah, but like that's what a lot of those early things that he was writing for them were for radio. Not for TV and movies. So that's not going to show up on like IMDb or anywhere like that. But that's where he got started, is writing gags for radio for them.
Oh, nice.
And for live shows probably as well. But I know he did a lot of radio stuff,
which still lends well to working on the Muppets, because a lot of it, there's a big, visual component to the Muppets. The jokes themselves kind of work with the audio alone. It's a lot of dad jokes. It's a lot of puns. So yeah, it works well.
So as for what they were going to write, we got to sit down and write a script. Well, what's it about, right? Well, they had not quite figured that out yet. See, Jim had some ideas for the film, but he had always had difficulties explaining just exactly what he was looking for in terms of story. Jim would often have gags and big moments from the film worked out in his head, and he knew the emotion, the feeling that he was looking to convey, but plot specifics tended to be a little bit more vague.
Jim's like, fuck your plot. I've got visions. I got vibes. I got Kermit in a trench coat, and he's screaming for more joy. Bring me joy, guys. Basically, he's handing Rose and Jewel a fever dream and saying, I need happy and loud.
Yeah.
Give it to me. Figure it out.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not that far off. Here's what he knew he wanted for a sequel. He knew he wanted it to be an homage to classic Hollywood musicals. He wanted Kermit to be a reporter turned detective who'd have to compete with a rival for Miss Piggy's affection. And that was kind of it, like plot-wise at least. Beyond that, he just said he wanted the script to be joyful, with a positive attitude toward life. These are exact quotes, by the way. And that he wanted it to contain, and again, I quote, several hilarious sequences with big laughs and some real emotions / relationships. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I feel like he also gave those notes to the guys writing the songs, because it's just those seem like they're dangerously close to the lyrics of that opening number. It's like, there'll be big laughs and some real feels, and someone will probably slip on a banana peel.
You're right,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
I feel like calling it vague is like putting it lightly.
Yeah.
He's giving him an outline that is basically Kermit's a detective, Piggy's fabulous, make it funny and go. It's like, it's less of a blueprint and it's more David Lynch sitting in a diner sketching on a napkin, like, here's some things I've been feeling.
Well, I mean, that's
lately.
what it is. I mean, I even found scans of Jim's literal notes that he had written for this, and if you look them over, they're on the Jim Henson Red Book website. I'll maybe post them on our socials or something, but if you look them over, they're very vague. Like it literally just is kind of what I was just saying. Like the first line on the first one says, film should have a joyful, fun film, positive attitude towards life. It's like, well, what the fuck does that mean, Jim? Like,
I love it. I love that he's got this dreamy, like, I'll know it when I feel it approach. Like, Kermit's the detective badass. Piggy's strutting around and throat punching people, and Fozzie's gonna bomb so hard you cry, and Gonzo will yeet himself off a cliff or something. I don't know.
I think that's in one of those notes. Gonzo will yeet off a cliff.
Yeah, I think that was a deleted scene. So with very little to go on, Rose and Jewel began to work on the story, and meanwhile, Jim was busy hiring other integral members of the crew. Now, since this was Jim's first time in the director's chair on a feature-length film, he wanted to be sure to have a well-seasoned veteran behind the camera. He also knew that whoever he for his Muppet sequel to be, his director of photography, he would also want that same person to work on the far more ambitious fantasy project that he was planning. So Jim, he had some idea of what to expect working on another Muppet movie because he'd been there, done that on the first film, but he felt that it was important to establish a working relationship for the next film, which was sure to be the more difficult one. And the man he hired for the job was a cinematographer named Ossie Morris, who'd been working since the 1940s and had found a lot of success in the late 60s and early 70s working on films like Oliver and Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah, I also saw that he was the DP on Scrooge, the one with Albert Finney from 1970. And he also did The Man with the Golden Gun in 74, which will not be the last time we reference James Bond today. And he also did 1978's The Wiz.
Oh yeah, I mean he worked with John Huston a lot. He did John Huston's Moulin Rouge.
Yes, I saw that too.
Yeah, he was a heavy hitter. Like
Yeah.
all those films you mentioned, like Oliver and Fiddler both won like Oscar nods at least, and he'd shot everything from like dramas to musicals to he's like Gandalf of cinematography or something.
Right.
And it's like Jim Henson again on what I really do feel like there is a switch in Jim Henson here. Like something's happened. He's just like going in there and just like throwing all this shit out. I don't know. Maybe he's always been that way, but now it just feels like in this movie, he's just like, yeah, and I'm going to get Ossie Morris.
Yeah.
Make my puppet circus look like it's Oscar worthy, you piece of shit. You did Dickums, now do Sweetums.
So let's also not forget that while all of this pre-production stuff was happening on the second Muppet movie, preliminary design work on Jim's fantasy film, which he was now calling The Crystal, which would, of course, eventually be renamed The Dark Crystal, but right now it's just The Crystal. It's not dark yet, I guess. It's just a normal crystal. All of this was happening in the Muppet Workshop. So they're working on this while they're working on the Muppet sequel. Not only that, but Jim was still fulfilling his duties on Sesame Street and actively working on The Muppet Show, which wrapped up its 4th season in February of 1980 after being delayed due to some worker strikes in England. So they finished it much later than it had originally been planned. So after only a 2-week break, Jim reassembled the Muppet team to begin to work on the show's 5th season, which would, as it turns out, be the show's last.
He's a freaking cyborg is what he is.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense. He's like a mad scientist and he's like making new nightmare puppets and at the same time teaching kids how to count cookies.
Yeah.
And then doing all of this like in a rush with the Muppet Show for like because of a strike. Yeah, let me take 2 weeks off, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I'm grabbing coffee during the apocalypse or something. Like it's just
And you know he was probably working during those 2 weeks doing other things. Like there was no way he was just sitting on his ass. Like he was doing stuff, probably having meetings in multiple countries, probably, you know.
Right.
Or if he did go on vacation, it's like he went to the Swiss Alps to go skiing or something.
Yeah.
Jim had never really expected the Muppet Show to go on forever. But he did have hopes that it would live on in perpetuity in syndicated reruns, thus providing a steady revenue stream for years to come. Pretty smart. That's a great business plan. But the general rule of syndication is that a show needs to have 100 episodes to go into syndication. By the end of season 4 of The Muppet Show, they had 96 episodes. So we're close, but not quite there. A 5th season would put them in line for syndication.
That's so nuts to me that like it's like you're in a marathon and you collapse like right before the finish line or something that like he's like, I'm this close to immortality with the Muppet Show. Like, give me one more. Kermit's like curled up in the corner crying, and like he's just like, pull it together. One more season. We're rolling in puppet dough. Give it to me. I don't think any of this is really like how Jim Henson is. I've just made some new Jim Henson character.
You've turned him into like a supervillain of some sort.
Right.
Like the sweetest, most gentle man on the planet, and you've turned him into a supervillain.
Twisting his mustache.
You've turned him into Dr. Evil.
I was about to say like Dr. Evil on meth, as I feel like the characterization I'm creating of Jim Henson right now.
So you do also have to wonder, like, why did Jim decide to end the show after season 5? Because it wasn't as if the ratings had gone down or anything. It was arguably at its peak in terms of popularity when season 4 wrapped. But the truth of the matter is that he just felt like it was time to hang it up. He had enjoyed his time on The Muppet Show. He had enjoyed everything that its success had afforded him, both personally and professionally. But, I mean, the truth of it is he was just ready to move on to other projects.
How many people go like, I got 5 seasons, super hit, like most successful show on television, kind of? Well, I'm out. I'm going to have Kermit light the Muppet Show stage on fire, flip the bird, and exit.
Yeah.
The only other show I can think of that did that is Seinfeld. I mean, it went on longer. It went on for like 9 seasons. But in that 9th season, they were arguably at their peak popularity. Like it was one of the most, if not the most popular show on television. And they decided to stop making Seinfeld because they didn't want to go over that hump and the quality to start going down. They wanted to go out on a high note, which they did. And I feel like Jim Henson probably had that same kind of mentality. He's like, we've got a great product. There's not everyone loves it. If we keep going on forever, we're going to run out of gags. It's going to lose momentum. And eventually it's just going to get canceled anyway. So why not go out when it is fully beloved from beginning to end?
I feel like Chappelle's Show had a little bit of that, but I mean, there's obviously
there were other factors.
There are other
Show,
some other really really big factors there, but it was just kind of like, I mean, 3 seasons of Chappelle's Show. I think it could have easily gone for twice.
It could still be on.
It could very well still be on.
I wonder what it's like being around him, though. You know, which I know that we have a documentary and a whole biography we can read that tells us a little bit about it. But it just feels so bold and so stubborn that he's so easily, just like how he will toss a Muppet aside when he's done using it, just be like, this part's over.
Yeah.
I want a new party. I'm going to go do this other thing, and I'll steer this shit straight into the abyss if I have to.
Well,
whatever.
You also got to think that, you know, if you're working for him, I guess on one hand, you know that the Muppets are popular enough that no matter what Jim Henson decides to do next, you're going to have a job.
Yeah.
Working on it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, what if whatever he does next isn't successful? And, you know, and we're going down with the ship kind of thing. Everyone who worked for him seemed to have faith in him, and you know, it is admirable that he is pursuing his artistic ambitions over monetary gain, because he could have kept doing the Muppet Show for another 10 years and probably made a lot more money doing that. But he decided, I've got other things that I creatively want to do. The artistic side of me wants to do something different and not do the same thing over and over and over again. And to me, that's admirable, because not a lot of people would do that, because that is a ballsy move, and most people would stick with the thing that's making them a lot of money.
Yeah. I thought earlier today, as I was going through stuff, and I was like, I wonder what the quality would have been like if he had like the work process of somebody like a Chris Nolan, who is all about one project until it is completely done and then is on to one other project, you know.
Yeah.
Not only the quality, but like, I think it's probably a safe bet that he'd probably still be alive.
Maybe.
I mean, he was an older guy. He'd be an older guy, probably close to retirement for sure. But
he would be in his 80s, I think. Yeah, he'd been in his mid to late 80s at this point. But yeah, I mean, different artists work different ways, and the big difference with Christopher Nolan is that Christopher Nolan doesn't know what humor is. I don't think he, in any way, shape, or form.
Weird to say that, and he's also directed a character called the Joker.
I know, right?
Yeah,
ironic. It's ironic. So, as production on the final season of the Muppet Show began, Rose and Jewel continued to work on their script for the Muppet Movie 2, which by their second draft had been retitled The Muppets Hit the Road. It's kind of a fun little title. When they turned this draft into Jim, though, he was not thrilled with it. Did not like it at all. There were story elements and characters in place that would make it into the final script, although some details like character names would change, like Lady Holiday was in there, but she wasn't called Lady Holiday, things like that. Like little details would change, although the mechanics of it were there. But there was something about the script that just wasn't quite what Jim was looking for.
I believe I asked for more joy, you fucks. Rose and Jewel think they got it nailed, and then they get the old Henson stink eye. They're right next to Kermit, curled up in the corner, and Jim Henson screaming at them, I need this to shit rainbows right now.
I like the idea of them being berated with Kermit.
Yeah.
Like Jim's got Kermit on his hand. Just
like there's Jim Henson's desk, but there's Kermit's desk that is set like right on top of it, next to it, so he can just sit there.
I would do that. That's what I would do if I were Jim Henson.
Yeah. But honestly, like looking at the title, The Muppets Hit the Road, because even when I first saw that, I was like, wasn't that what the first movie was about?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, the first one's a road movie. This one's not a road movie. Although maybe their original draft was more road movie-ish. And maybe that was, I don't know. That's complete speculation. Maybe that was what Jim was like, this is like, we did this, guys. We're going to do something different this time. So Jim ends up hiring another set of writers to take a swing at it. Tom Patchett and Jay Tarsus. They were a writing team who had worked with Bob Newhart and Carol Burnett, so their sense of humor certainly aligned with Jim's. And as they began their rewrite on Rose and Jewel's script, Jim continued filling out other members of his creative team. He hired Sesame Street alum Joe Raposo to write the film's music and songs, for one thing. That's a big catch. I'm not sure why he didn't bring Paul Williams back on.
Yeah.
It might have been a scheduling thing. I don't know. I could not find that anywhere. I mean, I imagine it was a scheduling thing. I don't know why you wouldn't bring the guy on who got nominated for an Oscar for the previous movie to come back and do the sequel. But also hiring the guy who wrote It's Not Easy Being Green is a pretty good consolation prize.
Yeah.
So not a bad choice. He also brought on a choreographer named Anita Mann to plan the film's as yet unwritten dance sequences. And Jim had likely met Mann when he did Cher's variety show back in 1975. Remember, we talked a little bit about that because she had been Cher's choreographer. And then she had worked with Jim on The Muppets Go Hollywood in 1979, for which she had been nominated for an Emmy. Also, I have to point out, I think the name Anita Mann sounds like the name of a female character from the Austin Powers movies.
I was gonna say, oh man, who's gonna make the Anita Mann joke first? Because I got one in the barrel.
I am sad to say that I did not catch that at all.
No?
I didn't.
God,
No, and
Gary.
I am so disappointed.
You are-
I'm so
I mean,
disappointed in myself.
listen,
She's the
you
cousin of a lot of vagina.
No, Gary's been doing great with the alternate version of Jim Henson this week. So yeah,
I think I was just caught up in that being where my humor's going to aim towards in this one. And I totally missed the low hanging fruit. Anita Mann. And I was like, how did I not get that?
Anita Mann, and the low hanging fruit. Isn't that the name of Gary's mom's porn?
Oh, I think that's a punk. That sounds like a punk band to me. That sounds like a female-led punk band from the 1970s.
Nice.
And they're awesome. They had one album, and then they broke up. They were 16 years old at the time.
Anyway, it is like he is assembling a Muppet Avengers for this movie, is what it feels like to me. Like he is like
every talented person he knows.
Yeah, it's like Tarsus are like in the cowboy comedy cavalry coming in, and Jim's like, "You fix my puppet, baby." And then Joe Raposo is he's going to drop some Sesame Street bangers in the middle of this one, which is awesome. And for the record, by the way, I was going to say it towards the end, but just so you know, he did also, for the first time it happens, get nominated for an Oscar. So that worked out.
Yeah, it worked out.
Anyway, and then Anita Mann making Miss Piggy make Saturday Night Fever look like a first-year dance class. Like it's going to be,
Yep. So Patchett and Tarsus worked pretty fast and quickly turned in a first draft to Jim, which was at least enough to work off of. Like there was enough in this first draft to where it might needed a little bit more refining before going in front of cameras, but most of the story elements that were there, it was enough for them to start scouting locations, building sets, things like that. It was enough to start the movie. Like we're going in the right direction. And the script that they turned in June of 1980 was called The Good, the Bad, and the Muppets, which is a quirky enough title, but one that didn't quite fit the film.
Yeah, I like that title, but unless we're having like Kermit and Fozzie in a shootout, like the old Wilkins and Wonkins days,
yeah,
or somebody's putting a gun to somebody's head.
Also, we already did the Western thing at the end of the Muppet movie.
That's also a fair point. Yeah, okay, it's weird. Yeah, people keep trying to dive back into the same well. Right. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, but I feel like their big challenge on that first movie was like, well, let's put them in a car. I feel like another big challenge would have been like, all right, now let's put them on horseback and let's have them with like Clint Eastwood. It would be tricky for sure, but I feel like a full-on Muppet Western, but with like Clint Eastwood and, God rest him, Gene Hackman. I thought of Gene Hackman from, The Quick and the Dead.
Yeah, I was like, or The Good, the Bad, or Unforgiven.
Or Unforgiven, yeah. Oh my God, how cool would that movie be?
Gene Hackman was great at playing a bastard in a Western, that's for sure.
Jim Henson probably added 10 years to his life here, not having to get himself underneath a horse to operate Kermit.
Yeah, seeing that one picture of Jim working Ernie with that other puppeteer like right in his armpit
with Richard Hunt like his nose right here.
Yeah, so I imagine just he's puppeting Kermit, but his face is right in that horse's crotch.
Well, there's a deleted scene from the first Muppet movie that I've seen photos of with Statler and Waldorf on riding a camel. I don't know what the context was, but there are pictures of Statler and Waldorf riding a camel, but the camel itself is also a Muppet. So like the camel legs are very clearly like two dudes' legs, like they're shaped like man legs.
Yeah.
So it's clearly like the puppeteer's legs. Like it would be Jim and Richard Hunt, I think, is who played Statler and Waldorf. I imagine that's why that scene was cut, because it doesn't look good. Like the legs look like a man's legs wearing like tights, essentially.
Yeah, but now that you say that, it does feel like the horse would have to also be a Muppet. And you'd have like 3 guys in there or something.
Yeah.
Operating the thing.
Yeah, but I feel like if you figure out how to have a Muppet on a real horse, you just want at least a technical Oscar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it was the animatronic. Anyway, we're getting off subject.
Oh, I did have one quick thing because you mentioned Bob Newhart and Carol Burnett, and I was like, well, they were really famous. I wonder if they were on the Muppet Show. So just in case anybody's curious, Bob Newhart was never appeared with the Muppets, but Carol Burnett was in the 15th episode of the final season of the original Muppet Show.
Thank you for that fun fact, Todd.
Yeah, little fun fact.
So talking about the title of the movie, at various points in pre-production, the film had been given working titles like Muppet Mania, all right, or simply the Muppet Movie 2 for a while, or in Jim's journal, he just abbreviated it MM2. Which if it came out in like 2010 would have been like the whole marketing thing, like X2, like MM2, it would have been stupid. But they were getting to the point in production where they need a title for the movie. Like we need a title. Jim's solution to this problem was to hold a contest among the Muppet staff to see who could come up with the best name. So some of the sillier titles that were submitted included A Froggy Day in London, because it's set in London, and there's Kermit the Frog.
That's not bad.
And the Rocky Muppet Picture Show, which begs the question, if there was a Muppet remake of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, who would be cast in which roles?
I mean, I kept seeing a lot of, thought about Miss Piggy and fishnets, but it would be Kermit. Kermit's already done drag anyway.
Now, you think Kermit is going to be Frankenfurter?
No.
No, I think Kermit and Piggy are Brad and Janet.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, they're Brad and Janet.
Yeah, they're
right.
Brad and Janet. I think Gonzo's probably Riff Raff.
Oh, see, I had initially thought Gonzo for Frankenfurter.
No, Frankenfurter is your one
Frankenfurter's
human.
going to be tough.
Frankenfurter's your human. Played by, I don't know, Alaska Thunderfuck or somebody.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like someone like that, But then all the rest of the Transylvanians and Brad and Janet are your Muppets.
Yeah, well, and Fozzie's the professor or whatever.
Fozzie, maybe. Fozzie could also be Rocky because that would just be funny. That like,
what if it was the
it's supposed to be like this Adonis. It's like perfect specimen, and then fucking Fozzie Bear's chunky ass comes out of the machine. I think that would be funny.
What if you had like Sam the Eagle? What if you had Sam as the professor?
Sam could be the professor. That's good. That would be good.
Yeah,
Sam's the professor. Gonzo's Riff Raff, which means Camilla is Magenta. Maybe Camilla, the penguin, because even though they're brother and sister, there's an incestual weird thing.
That's
there.
true.
I think Floyd is Eddie and Janice is Columbia because Floyd and Janice
I was
are
about
an
to say
item.
that one.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think we'd crack the code, guys. Bob Iger, you own the Muppets and Rocky Horror Picture Show.
If you get RuPaul as a producer, it will happen.
If you get RuPaul as a producer, it's going to be a lot cornier than the movie that we just watched.
And it'll all be on green screens.
Yeah, it'll premiere on VH1.
Yeah.
Also, why wouldn't you just call it the Rocky Muppet Show instead of the Rocky Muppet Picture Show?
Because it's a picture show. The Rocky Horror Show was the play. The Rocky Horror Picture Show was the movie.
Yeah, well, the Muppet Show, though, you already have the Muppet Show, so why wouldn't you just say the Rocky Muppet Show? Is what I would.
Well, it would be like the Rocky Muppet movie. But then that kind of brings in like, okay, is it a boxing movie?
Do you know who would be good as Rocky is? Like you get like John Cena, because he just hit me as before officially this episode started, we were talking about humans that should be in Muppet stuff, and John Cena would also be good.
He would be great.
Would be good.
He would be great. All right. So anyway, it ended up being a suggestion from Jim's 19-year-old daughter, Lisa, that caught his attention as far as these titles went. She had turned in a note, handwritten little note that she wrote. On it, she wrote, "The Great Muppet Capade," which doesn't, quite roll off the tongue, the Great Muppet Capade. But then in the margins of that note, she had written some other, it's like she was like playing through different words, and she had written some other stuff and then crossed them out, as she was kind of working this out. She wrote words like escapade, espigade, like pig, like Miss Piggy. Get it?
Oh, yeah.
Which also makes me think the Rocky Muppet Picture Show.
Oh,
nice.
Would be good. And then she wrote Caper. That was another one she wrote. So Jim, he circled the title, The Great Muppetcade, and then he circled one of her crossed out options, which was Caper, and then kind of combined those two. And that's how we got our movie title, The Great Muppet Caper.
Nice.
And not that I wouldn't have watched any of the other ones, but let's give props to Lisa Henson for being the Muppet Messiah. And we finally got something
It's
here.
clever.
Yeah.
and a direction probably for the writers to go in. That's probably helpful because I can't help but feel like when Rizzo in the movie like complains about this is the worst script I've ever seen, I can't help but to think that that's a nod to them dealing with all these guys.
So pre-production work on The Great Muppet Caper continued through the summer of 1980, and a final screenplay was submitted in July of that year using material from all 4 credited writers, and Raposo also around the same time submitted his final songs and the film's musical score. So he wrote the musical score before the movie was shot, which is not unheard of, but it is unusual. But maybe he had to squeeze it in before he started on the next season of Sesame Street. Who knows? But before cameras could roll, Jim needed to wrap up the last few episodes of The Muppet Show. And the final episode that they filmed, which featured guest star Gene Kelly, great episode, wrapped on Friday, the 22nd of August, 1980. And when floor manager Richard Holloway called wrap on the final scene, he was immediately hit in the face with a pie, which is, I think, a very appropriate ending for the Muppet Show team. I think the only other option would be for him to explode, which would have been considerably more messy.
Yeah, probably right. But I don't think it's just appropriate. It's poetry. Thanks for 5 seasons, Rich. Splat.
Yeah.
Tap dancing cream filling, Gene.
It's great. I think every episode of this show should end with one of us getting hit in the face with a pie.
Todd,
every time. Even though we're in separate
Todd
rooms.
For our Cinema Shock Plus subscribers, like Todd should hit himself in the face with a pie at the end of every recording.
The Muppet Show was only one of 2 significant endings to come for Jim that year. You see, Jim's wife, Jane, had, we've talked about this over the last few episodes, but she's never really enjoyed the mile-a-minute life that Jim lived, constantly traveling from New York to London to Los Angeles to wherever. Jim seemed to thrive on that pace, constantly working, rarely sleeping. But Jane longed for a quieter life, it seemed like. Over the years, she'd felt more and more alienated from Jim and his work. And while she still supported him and was happy for all the success that him and the company that she'd helped build had been met with, that life just wasn't for her. She had spent the last year or so living with Jim in a home in London that he had purchased, because he lived in London basically 6 months out of the year making the Muppet Show. But she'd always felt out of place there and decided that it was time to go back home, time to go back to New York. So while Jim and Jam, they never officially divorced, that year that they spent living together in London was the last time that they really ever lived together as a man and wife.
I had some thoughts as I was going through this, especially in that scene in the Dubonnet Club. Jim Henson.
It's really more of a supper club than a restaurant.
That's true. That's true.
It's one of my favorite jokes.
It is. It's a great joke. But in that scene at the Dubonnet Club, Gonzo approaches the table, and of course Jim Henson's sitting there, and of course you see who he's sitting next to, and I was like, "That's not Jane."
No.
I was like, "Uh-oh." So, but if anybody's curious, the woman he's sitting next to is Muppet builder and designer Amy Van Gilder.
Oh, that's neat. I mean, I don't know that they were hinting at anything in that scene, but it is interesting that was another Muppet builder. I didn't know that. And then the next table that he goes to is a guy who is out with a woman that is someone other than his wife. That's the joke.
Yeah.
So
That hits hard though, doesn't it? Jim's a puppet crazed tornado. He's like bouncing around all over the world.
Yeah.
Mainlining ambition or whatever he's on. And she's done with the roller coaster. So that's the end. So in the middle of all of this, he gets that gut punch. I guess he probably saw it coming. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim was also he was known to go out to dinner with ladies, kind of, going out to dinner kind of thing. And Jane kind of knew that. But he was so they weren't quite living separate lives, but they sort of had an unspoken understanding, it seemed like, in that regard. It's weird to hear them talk about their relationship, because when they talk about, even when they first got together, they never talk about them falling in love and all this stuff. It's just a thing that sort of just happened as they were working together. Then all of a sudden they're getting married, sort of thing. It's not like, it wouldn't make a very good love story in a movie, because it's just sort of well, we're both here, kind of thing. Not that they didn't care for each other, but it's an interesting relationship the more you read about it.
It comes off real, for lack of a better term, comes off very Republican, but then at the same time, hearing that, well, they were still living together, and I mean they had a truckload of kids. So to be perfectly honest, it kind of reminded me of my parents' relationship, where it was just kind of like they're of that era where you don't get divorced.
Well, Jim never really wanted a divorce. Like he wanted to be married. It felt like again, he wanted to be able to come home to a wife and kids and live that like traditional family life when he was available to do so. But then but he also wanted to have this separate single life kind of thing. You know, like he wanted to have his cake and eat it too. And I can see, I mean, obviously that's going to be frustrating for the wife as well, you know, for a variety of reasons.
Oh, sure.
You got to also remember though that Jane owns a big chunk of this company. Like she's still like 40% owner of the company, I think at this point, 30 or 40%, you know, that's a whole legal mess that they're going to go through for years that we're probably not going to really get into very much. It's just boring.
And Jim's never really loved anything anyway as much as his creating shit. So that's no, he's got
his kids,
everything
and his kids.
Well,
Which,
yeah,
he loves his kids.
I don't mean that in like an asshole way. I just
I
mean
know
like
what you mean. Like that's his first love is art. Yes.
Yeah, it's his obsession, and so but now it's come at a cost. Jim, you're married to chaos now. Congratulations. But imagine, this sounds so weird to say, but I was like reading more about that and then imagining him like hunched over Kermit, like working on a bicycle thing in London Park, knowing his whole personal life is imploding.
Yeah.
I'm just like, what a weird
thing to have in the back of your mind. Like a juxtaposition of,
the juxtaposition. Exactly. Like just this, what a weird thing.
Yeah. Very strange. So on September 4th, 1980, less than 2 weeks after wrapping on the final episode of The Muppet Show, cameras rolled on The Great Muppet Caper. This man does not take time off. Like it has been 2 weeks since The Muppet Show wrapped, and we're shooting the new movie.
That's like the max that he gives himself.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Now we're back. So this time, instead of shooting in the greater Los Angeles area, as the Muppet movie had, the sequel would film right there in London, which had been Jim's home away from home for the last 5 years.
And yeah, that was mainly my thought here was 2 weeks after the Muppet Show. He's a machine. Yeah. He's a cyborg. Like I said earlier, no rest, no mercy, just chaos. And he's in the middle of all of this and is still like, all right, I'm done. Let's roll.
Yeah, let's go. And right away, they decided to tackle one of the film's most technically difficult scenes. The first scene that they filmed, it was one of the movie's big how did they do that moments. In the Muppet movie, audiences had been wowed by the image of Kermit riding on a bicycle. So for the Great Muppet Caper, Jim would take that concept a step further, putting his entire Muppet cast on bicycles and pedaling them through London's Battersea Park.
I'm imagining like everybody around him and they're like, well, I want to do a bicycle scene again. And like, okay, yeah, well, we've done that. So we know how that works. We got it down. He's like, no, I want a pedaling Muppet Tour de France.
Yeah. Right, I want a dozen Muppets on bicycles, including the mice. So, well, obviously we talked about that scene in the Muppet movie pretty at length, and it was impressive. But that scene in the first film had been pulled off with fairly simple techniques involving a marionette being dangled from a crane. Trying to add a dozen additional Muppets into the mix was going to make things a little bit more difficult this time around. And in the end, it was actually Jim's 16-year-old son, Brian Henson, who helped to figure out how to pull it off. So Brian, who had been on summer break from school, had been working alongside Faz Fazakis, that's the Muppets, like the tech guy, the gadget guy, in the Muppets London workshop, which had been actually forced to move locations after the finale of the Muppet Show since ATV studio spaces were no longer available to them. And Jim ended up purchasing an abandoned postage sorting facility that was right across the street from his London home, which would become the workshop where creations for films like The Great Muppet Caper, The Dark Crystal, and Labyrinth were all created, while the New York workshop continued to work on other Muppet projects like Sesame Street and things like that. Now, Brian had already shown a passion and aptitude for technology and puppetry. He was especially good with a marionette, and his father had encouraged him to work alongside Faz while he was on a summer break to kind of learn the ropes, figure it all out, see what he liked doing. And in the end, the techniques for the multi-bike scene involved a combination of radio-controlled bikes, animatronics, marionette rigs, and for some shots, attaching several bikes together with rods so that they could stand upright on their own. And Brian himself serves as one of the lead puppeteers for the scene, wheeling the marionettes of Kermit and Miss Piggy.
I mentioned the thing earlier, and you were like, and his kids, like he loves his kids. It is cool to see like his kids make so many contributions to something like in this, like with Lisa and then Brian here making a contribution, and like Cheryl Henson was helping with like costume stuff, I think. And it's cool to see like that at least among all of this, the Muppet is like a homegrown thing, and it's like got this like his whole family's involved in it. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. And like the kind of marionetting that Brian was doing on this is like was very complex because, you know, there are those scenes where Kermit and Piggy are going in circles, right?
Oh,
like they're
yeah,
riding, and
yeah.
he's
Yeah.
doing that from a crane that can allow him to move in 360 degrees. Like it's pretty insane. If you look up, I couldn't find any photos of that. I found photos of other parts where they were hanging from the crane, but I did find the plans, like the drawn out plans, which is like a bird's eye view of the route that they were going to take it through the park, and with the circles drawn out and with a like diagram of the crane hide, which it's a pretty insane setup. But it's wild when you watch the scene because you can, I mean, if you're looking for it, you can tell when Kermit's a animatronic because he moves a little more jerkily and stuff like that. But you really have to be looking for it. You can even see the rods that hold the wheels together on the separate bikes if you're looking for it. They don't hide them. But the Muppets have never been about hiding the technique necessarily. I mean, when you watch Kermit, a lot of times on the Muppet Show, the rods that hold his hands up are very clearly there. They're not trying to hide those at all, you know? So I don't think that they really cared if the rods would show because it's still cool.
Such an impressive shot. Kermit in the arms of Piggy, who is circling on a bicycle. It's so impressive. Like it is as impressive as the first shot in the Muppet movie, but this just cranks it to 11 where like I found myself watching even closer on multiple takes of just kind of like,
and you're trying to guess from one shot
so
to
good.
the next, you're trying to guess, how did they do this part? Is this a marionette or is this a animatronic or this is a close up? So this must just be a puppet. Like you almost want to try to figure out what they're doing from one angle to the next. It's a cool scene. It's very impressive.
It's kind of special that like, well, it says something about the characters you've created and stuff that like the characters and also just the art of the whole thing, that your two options are nobody's watching the Muppets and going like, this looks fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Like I don't feel like people generally have that idea. You're either watching it and you're so lost in what you're watching that you don't care and you're just like drawn into the story and you're not even thinking about it. Or if you are thinking about it, like what Todd was just saying, then you're thinking about like how could you do this? Like, this is amazing. Like, it's just so crazy because you would not get that in anything modern. It feels like you wouldn't, no CG movies ever going to have, maybe like if you're talking Star Wars or something, the CG in that, maybe you're, you know, that's fantastical enough that you're like, wow, what's happening here? But yeah, you just don't, I don't know. I feel like this is a feeling you only get kind of with something like this, like the Muppets.
And as impressive as that scene is, it's actually not the Great Muppet Caper's true showstopper. That title, I think, goes to Miss Piggy's Underwater Ballet, which is a scene that Jim created in homage to those made famous by Esther Williams in the 1940s and 50s. Now, this one proved to be even more difficult to pull off because you couldn't just use an everyday, Miss Piggy puppet and toss it in a swimming pool. After all, the Muppets are made out of foam, which is highly absorbent and would just soak up the water like a sponge. That's not going to work.
This is literally the one that made me do all of those things that I just talked about because I was watching it this time and I had never thought about it before. And it's been a long time since I'd seen the movie, but I was watching it this time and going, wait a minute. This doesn't work. How is she in water?
Not only would she be absorbent, but the water would eventually wash away all of the flocking on the character, which would leave the puppet discolored, and it would leave an unsightly layer of flock shavings on the pool surface. So that wasn't going to work. We had to figure something out. So Jim set his Muppet builders on a mission to figure out a way to design a puppet that was not only waterproof, but still expressive enough for Frank Oz to operate it underwater. So this led to a lot of R&D on the part of the Muppet team, led by Carol Lee Wilcox, the director of the New York workshop. After a lot of trial and error, the team settled on a technique that involved carving the puppet out of a type of compressed urethane foam, which wouldn't soak up the water. So we got that part figured out. That didn't solve the issue of the flocking washing off, so they had to do more research. So after looking into a lot of options in that regard, they would contact some chemical companies, like anyone who might be able to help them solve this dilemma. Wilcox's team, which they unofficially called the Piggy Research and Development Department, devised an elaborate recipe for carving, cutting, gluing, flocking, and then baking the individual puppet parts, which served to cure them and fuse the flocking into place. So, I mean, this is an insane amount of work for a single scene that's 3 minutes of the film, probably. Yeah.
This is the part that Todd would usually jump in and say we need a T-shirt for it, but we should get a Piggy Research and Development Department, PRDD shirt.
Oh my God, yes. I'm so on board for that.
So while this process worked like a charm, there was one caveat. It caused the material to have a lot less stretch to it than the Muppets normally did. So as soon as Oz would open Piggy's mouth to do an exaggerated move, the corner of the mouth on the puppet would tear. So their solution to this was simple. We're just going to build a whole bunch of piggy heads. If a mouth tears during a take, they're just going to replace the entire head with a new one. And in the end, nearly 40 Miss Piggy heads and 7 different bodies would be used to film this scene.
This is starting to feel less wholesome and more like The Prestige now. Like, it's just, I mean, you got me thinking about Nolan, I guess.
So all in all, it took about a week to film this sequence. Again, a week for something that's going to be, 3 minutes of screen time, which I guess is kind of on par with the opening scene of the Muppet movie. What did that take? Like 5 days or so to film the Rainbow Connection scene for, a single song in the movie. This scene was filmed in an enormous soundstage at Elstree Studios. It was, in fact, filmed at the very same soundstage where Luke Skywalker had battled Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back just a year earlier. That's a movie that we're going to talk about a little bit more on our next episode. I'm sure anyone who knows anything about Jim Henson knows why. And Jim had in this soundstage, Jim had a swimming pool constructed that measured 80 feet long, 50 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. That is a big swimming pool. And then he had the water heated to a tropical 80 degrees for the comfort of his performers. And like many of the more complex scenes in the film, the water ballet was meticulously storyboarded so that the mechanics of each and every shot could be mapped out. Some shots would use a stiff figure with a remote control head, while one shot towards the end of the sequence, which shows Piggy kind of diving into the water in slow motion at the end, that used a child swimmer in a full body costume, just dressed up as Miss Piggy jumping in the pool. But mostly, Miss Piggy was a puppet manipulated underwater by Frank Oz, who performed wearing a wetsuit that was the same color blue as the walls of the pool so that he would blend in. Before each take, Oz would sink himself to the bottom of the pool using asphalt blocks to weight him down. A scuba diver with an oxygen tank would be sitting at the bottom of the pool. He'd hold a breathing tube over Oz's face until Jim signaled that they were filming, at which point Oz would take a deep gulp of air and they'd film the scene for basically as long as Oz could hold his breath. And they also had a complex system of monitors and speakers installed in the pool so that Oz could watch his performance while also receiving direction from Jim. It's insane what they went through to get this scene. But you know what? It is a spectacular scene. Like, it is a showstopper. It's one of those things where, like you were saying, Gary, like you watch it and you're like, how is this possible? Like, how are they doing this? It is pretty remarkable. I mean, I think it's as remarkable as anything they did in the first movie.
In my deep dive on everybody involved in the movie, I did come up with this little sort of cherry on top of the scene. One of the water ballet performers, her name is Susan Baccalini, but one of her earlier credits was as Chrissy in Jaws. She is the girl who dies at the beginning of Jaws.
What? Wow.
Yeah. So a couple of other little fun facts about Susan.
I've seen her vagina.
Yep. Speaking of which, she appeared in her own pictorial, The Lady and the Lion, in the January 1973 issue of Penthouse magazine.
Wow.
She owned and trained a bear whose growls were later recorded for use as the voice of Chewbacca. Now, you might say, Todd, how do you know that? How do you know that's legitimate? Well, you're right. I don't. But it did come from a tweet from Peter Mayhew. So I figure he's probably a pretty good source.
That's wild.
After her acting career, she worked as a computer accountant in Ventura, California. But I did find this one quote that I thought was kind of fun. She said, "I do about 4 or 5 conventions a year. It's fun to go out and meet all the fans. They all have the same thing to say. You've kept me out of the water."
So this was, I mean, this was after Jaws because Jaws was 75.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
she had already done Jaws at this point. That's wild. What a
yeah,
what a fun little fun fact.
yeah.
It's great. Scenes like this, the pool scene, the multi bike scene, while these scenes highlighted the spectacle that Jim was aiming for in his sequel, there were still a lot of like quieter, smaller moments that proved to be just as memorable, in my opinion. One such scene that Brian J. Jones points out in his Jim Henson biography, another shout out to that book because, again, it's fantastic. I think this scene and the story surrounding it really shows the type of person that Jim was. There's a scene in this film where we see Kermit sitting on a park bench overlooking a lake, and a bearded man and a young woman walk by. And the woman says, "Look, Dad, there's a bear," pointing at Kermit, to which the man replies, "No, Christine, that's a frog. Bears wear hats," which is a callback to the running joke in the film about Kermit and Fozzie being constantly mistaken for each other. It's a great joke. Like the Bears wear hats thing cracks me up every time because I like the last time we watched it, I just turned at Bunny. I was like, that's just a good joke. That's just a good joke. Like that's a well written joke. Good job, everyone involved. Well, the two people in that scene were Muppet performer Jerry Nelson and his daughter Christine. Jim had written the scene into the film specifically as just a bit of fun for Christine, who had spent her entire life in and out of hospitals being treated for cystic fibrosis, a disease that would unfortunately lead to her death the following September at the age of 22. And according to Jones in his book, a few years before this, this is just a great story about Jim. The insurance provider that Henson Associates was using had actually notified Jim that they would no longer be paying for Christine's medical expenses, which led to Jim dropping that insurance company and finding one that would cover her medical bills. So this company that's covering his entire company, this insurance provider, he's like kicking them to the curb because they won't take care of this one person's bills. And I think that's just the kind of guy that Jim Henson was. He cared about the people around him. He wanted to make sure they were being taken care of. I think that says a lot about his character, that he would do something like that. So just a really great story about him, I think, and a really sweet one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've given Jim a bad rap in this episode for some reason.
This is the balance to that equation.
Right. Just completely, I guess this is part of the filming or whatever. I didn't know where to really throw it in there, but I also, some interesting things that I thought about the filming with this were just like little side note fun facts. One was Miss Piggy that where she auditions for Lady Holiday's receptionist job. Apparently that whole scene was inspired by a real life incident where Jim Henson had a puppeteer audition for him under a fake name. And so I just thought that was kind of a cool little side guard.
I wonder who it was.
You know what? I couldn't find like who exactly it was, but I just saw that was the story behind it. But also not the biggest puppet ever because Animal's giant ass head exists from the Muppet movie.
Right.
But they did say one of the biggest, but at least the most intricate, that you wouldn't think of being a puppet that they created, but the Happiness Hotel bus is, basically just like they describe it, it's like one of the most intricate things they'd ever done. Like just as far as it was like a huge rig just operated by tons of people inside. I mean, the bus itself was a functioning vehicle.
Yeah.
But there's just like so many practical effects going on with the actual bus itself and like the Muppets that are inside of it and going through everything. I loved reading a little bit about that bus, and then that Frank Oz talks about loving just in that nightlife musical number that they do. Animal does the crazy ass drum solo that he does or whatever. And that was literally Frank Oz, like on real drums, doing the sound for that. Like, he was just like shouting, like screaming as Animal, like going apeshit on drums. And so I thought that
getting
was
getting a little frustration out, maybe.
Yeah. And Beauregard, by the way, who is driving, his cameo, apparently all of that stuff like was last minute. He'd been on the Muppet Show, but he got included in this movie because Jim Henson had received so many letters about Beauregard as a character that people wanted more of him. Yeah.
I think Dave Goelz plays Beauregard. That character is so funny to me. Like he's just not a Muppet that you really think of. kind of, like he's not one that's considered part of the core crew of Muppets.
Well, that's why I bring it up. Is like it's neat that apparently a lot of people did love him.
Yeah, I guess from his appearances on the Muppet Show, and he's very funny in this. Like he only has a couple of scenes, but I wouldn't quite call it a cameo, but it's a small role, but it's a very memorable and very funny one. Like he's got a lot of great jokes. Like I mean, he's the one who does the "What color are his hands now?" Like he's the one who which is a great running gag. I love it.
Can I say one thing about, since we're on the scene about the bus and the nightlife musical number? That music is banging. I love that.
The nightlife song.
Yeah, I was like, because especially listening to it this time around, I was like, yeah, I'd bump this in my car. This would be fun to drive down the road to.
Hey, anything by the Electric Mayhem, honestly.
Oh shit, yeah, man.
The songs in this are kick ass. But
yeah.
So while Jerry and Christine's cameos were more, the sentimental type, many of the other cameos in the film involved actors, especially British ones, who had appeared as guest stars on The Muppet Show. These included the great Peter Ustinov, who gets carjacked by Miss Piggy. I don't think you can call it anything else but a carjacking.
Right.
And Robert Morley, who Leonard Maltin's movie encyclopedia describes as recognizable by his ungainly bulk, bushy eyebrows, thick lips, and double chin, particularly effective when cast as a pompous windbag. Can you imagine?
So there's something else going on with Leonard.
What did you do to Leonard Maltin, Robert?
Yeah, something else is happening there.
He's the very British guy when they first land in the water, when they get thrown out of the airplane, who they ask for directions to a motel. That's sitting on the bench with the bowler hat and he's the one who tells them about the Happiness Hotel. That's Robert Morley. You also had Jack Warden in a role that's very reminiscent of his newspaper editor from All the President's Men. You have to wonder if that was why Jim Henson wanted him for this, because he was number one on Jim Henson's list for casting in this role was Jack Warden. Wow. And here he plays the editor-in-chief of the Daily Chronicle, where Kermit and Fozzie work. Now, Jack Warden, you may not know the name, but you've probably seen him in some stuff. He was also known for roles in films like 12 Angry Men, Shampoo, and Heaven Can Wait, although most people our age probably remember him as the asshole grandpa from Problem Child or as the asshole grandpa from Dirty Work.
When I saw Heaven Can Wait, I was just kind of like, that's where it was Heaven Can Wait for me. But a word
Problem
about
Child for me, because I watched that movie so much when I was a kid. Although I did watch 12 Angry Men recently, so I kind of, obviously he was a lot younger, but I always remember him from Problem Child.
Oh, yeah. A word about Dirty Work. It is unfair that we've lost Jack Warden, Bob Saget, and Norm Macdonald, but we are still stuck with Artie Lang. That is not fair.
Well,
that's so mean. That guy's turned his whole life around, Todd.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, I think Jack Warden would be 110 by now if he were still alive. So
listen, it's still.
But no, you're not going to get much argument from me. I just literally told my wife yesterday, I'm from now on going to start every day with a Norm Macdonald clip.
We all miss Norm Macdonald.
Yes.
And Bob Saget.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So other cameos in the film include Peter Falk in an uncredited and I think very funny role. Very strange scene. I love it.
Yeah.
And John Cleese and Joan Sanderson as a posh British couple in what I think is the funniest scene in the entire movie.
Yeah.
The John Cleese scene, it kills me. It is so it is only John Cleese could pull it off. There's something about the sense of humor in that scene that only John Cleese could pull it off. He's so nonchalant about Miss Piggy climbing up the side of the house, and the whole conversation with him and his wife, their interaction, both of their responses. And I don't know anything about Joan Sanderson. I don't know her from anything, but
knowing John Cleese, she's got to be a heavy hitter, because she keeps right in step with John Cleese, and that's not easy.
Oh, it's so. I'm just thinking of lines from the scene and laughing at them now, but it's so funny. And the butler's dead, you say? It's every line in it.
I was reading that a lot of that was ad-libbed.
Oh, I imagine so. I didn't know that, but I fully believe it, because it's very much his sense of humor. It's very that posh British or faux posh thing that John Cleese does so well.
Yeah.
It feels very much like him. So I 100% believe that it was ad-libbed. Good stuff.
Were they both in like a series or something together? I feel like they might have been, and I can't remember. Like I almost want to feel like
Like
I
a TV
read they were in
show?
like they were in like Faulty Towers or something.
Was she in
you know?
Faulty? I mean, that's the first thing. When you say series and John Cleese, if it's not Monty Python, my brain goes to Faulty Towers.
Yeah,
But I don't know.
I don't know either. I should have prepared for that better, but anyway.
It's all right. We forgive you. The only other major human roles in the film were filled by the hilarious Charles Grodin, who is more convincingly horny for a pig than anyone else has ever been in a movie, I think. And the legendary Diana Rigg, star of the TV show The Avengers, also one of my favorite Bond girls. Of course, modern audiences probably know her from Game of Thrones. But Diana Rigg is just a delight. Her Bond movie is I'd say top 3 Bond movies for me. For Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Nice.
Top 3 Bond movies.
I did read that she reportedly wasn't like super thrilled about this movie for some reason. Like despite that she does a really great job and she has really cool dry humor and everything, but she says she found it odd. But I will say also, I couldn't confirm like how true this is, but supposedly Charles Grodin, like that romantic infatuation with Miss Piggy was like supposedly not part of the script.
He
like,
just
he
did
had
it.
The lines, he just did it that way. And they were like, go with it. All
It's
right.
so funny. And his performance during, like in that song when he's singing.
Yeah.
Oh my, his singing voice is so funny. And then Piggy comments on it afterward. I love Charles Grodin. I think he's hilarious. He's a strange actor, strange screen presence, but it works in this role, I think. He's just doing some really weird twitchy stuff, and he's such a sleaze bag.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
He is one of those villains you love to hate.
Oh yeah. 100%. Yeah. And I love that they basically tell you that he's the villain right at the beginning. Like Diana Rigg lays the whole thing out when she's she's describing her brother. Like I wouldn't even put it past him to steal the diamond. Like she says it in the very first scene. Like she lays out the whole movie. So it's never a question of whether or not he's a villain, which I think is really funny. So after 5 months of shooting in the UK, Jim's crew traveled to the US to film their final sequence for the film, which happens to be the opening sequence that shows Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo floating in a hot air balloon as they comment on the opening credits. This sequence was actually shot in Albuquerque, New Mexico, of all places, which is a location that Jim would have been very familiar with because he visited it often to see his father, who had actually moved to Albuquerque during his retirement. So I think that's the main reason that Jim wanted to shoot there. They needed clear skies. Don't get a lot of those in London. So they're going to come to the US. He's like, you know what? Let's just fold this into me going to visit my dad and we'll shoot in Albuquerque. That's all I can guess. I don't know why else they would pick Albuquerque ahead of, 100 other places, but that's where they shot it. So for the wide shots in this scene, Jim, Oz, and Dave Goelz performed the scene by radio control. There were animatronic puppets in the hot air balloon. So they would be working from a nearby helicopter 1,000 feet in the air as a cameraman dangled from a second helicopter filming the scene. Really wild to me. Also, the shot where they you see the Muppets fly out of the airplane,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know how they did that? They threw Muppets out of an airplane. Yes. That's literally what they did. So, with this scene complete, The Great Muppet Caper wrapped on February 6th, 1981.
Good job, everybody.
Good job. The Great Muppet Caper opened in the USA in June of 1981, while Jim was deep into production on The Dark Crystal back in England. So any kind of press that he had to do on The Great Muppet Caper to promote it, he had to do like via satellite. He could because he was in another country. You know? Reviews for it this time around were a little bit more mixed than they had been on the Muppet movie. Roger Ebert, for instance, only gave it 2 stars, calling it too nice, too routine, too predictable, and too safe. But most critics overall seemed to enjoy it. Even Rex Reed, snippy little bitch that he is, said it was full of humanity, tenderness, and intelligence.
And the fact that Rex Reed can recognize humanity, tenderness, and intelligence is saying something, honestly.
It certainly is. So both of you guys mentioned in our last episode that The Great Muppet Caper was a movie that you watched more as a kid than you did, the original Muppet movie. This was kind of this one and the Muppets Take Manhattan. You watched a lot more, so there is a little bit of nostalgia associated with it for both of you, unlike me, who didn't watch this one nearly as much. So after watching it this time, having just also revisited the Muppet movie, and after having not seen this one in many years, what were your thoughts on it? Like, did it hold up to your childhood memories of it? Because I know I think, Gary, you said this was your favorite, or maybe it was Manhattan, but I know that you said you watched both of them more than the Muppet movie. And so obviously you loved it as a kid. Does adult Gary and does adult Todd feel the same way about it?
I wore the tapes out of these two movies when I was a kid, and
me too.
so I didn't have as much connection to the Muppet movie as these. So I will preface this by saying I'm willing to accept that nostalgia has some part of this for me, but immediately watching this movie again, and it's been 20 years, every part of it came back to me just like in a flash. Like all the songs came back. Like I just remembered them. I couldn't have told you before I hit play what any of the songs were.
They were locked somewhere in the back of your brain. And
as soon as it started, like just the opening song, like I just knew it. Yeah. And I was like, there it is. Holy shit. The whole Fozzie and Kermit like getting dressed, or Kermit in his tux and stuff. Yeah. Like I just knew like every scene. And so sure, there's probably a part of that in there for me. And I mostly even just say that because I don't think this is a popular opinion, but man, I fucking love this movie. Like, I think it's great. I think every bit of it's great. And to me, I would honestly back to back say I still like it better than the Muppet movie. And I just think that it's funnier and quicker, and just like the sets are so much cooler. Like just the Happiness Hotel is so cool.
The Happiness Hotel is so cool.
Love it.
It's a great set.
I think every single song is a banger. Like they're just all catchy, and just I don't know. I just think the whole thing is, every scene is funny, and I loved all of it. And I know that I could be biased, but I'm just saying, still, even on rewatch, it held up for me. Like I love it.
Nice.
If anyone out there has listened to this series so far, it's been made very apparent by me crying multiple times how much I love these movies. But I think for me, like I knew I was going to be all in on these. But I think for me, my experience watching them this time was more of a, what do I appreciate now, as opposed to when I was, a child, and looking at those things. Yeah, it's fun to see the Muppets doing anything, but now getting some of the other humor.
Well, like the John Cleese scene would not be as funny to a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old.
Exactly. Like understanding that dry British humor, even the smaller stuff. What color are their hands now?
Yeah.
No, that's a frog. Bears wear hats. Super, super funny, but
probably went over your head when you were a kid.
Stuff that went over your head as a kid. And I think now, looking at and I've already mentioned it once in this episode, but watching the bicycle scene, you are kind of mesmerized, because there is a part of you, or at least for me, there was a part of me that was just kind of like, this shouldn't be
possible.
Real. Yeah, this isn't possible. But even now, in my 40s, I'm watching this going, this shouldn't be possible. Like, even though we go through all the stuff, and I hear you and I see the images that you've put in the notes, and even with all that explanation, I could go watch that scene right now and go, how the fuck did they do this?
Yeah.
It is incredible.
Yeah.
And all the songs are bangers, man. Like,
dude, it's so good. Jack Warden in the beginning, you were talking about the bear thing. I don't know why, but every single time the fucking twin thing comes up, it just cracks me up.
It's a great joke. Yeah.
And just even at the beginning where they're like, where Jack Warden's like, how are you guys supposed to be? You're twins. You don't even look anything alike. Oh, it's because he doesn't have on his hat. Put on your hat, Fozzie.
He's like, I see it now.
Like, oh, okay. And so and then when he goes into his office and he's just like, just pay attention to what I'm saying, Fozzie, or something. He's like, no, he's Fozzie. He's like, oh, he's like, yeah, it's the hat.
So weird side note. I used to do that with both of my brothers because there's such a big age gap between me and my two older brothers. Anytime anyone would find out that we're brothers, they're like, really? And I go, yeah, let's stand next together. And we would do the kind of like open mouth smile, like at the same time. And it would still get the same reaction. People would look and go, oh yeah, I see it now.
I even love like the opening credits thing. I had totally forgotten about that.
Yeah.
And just how they like land right into the movie. But but them talking about the credits and like, does anybody even read these? Like,
I love that.
Yeah, they probably all got families.
And I love that line is when Jim Henson's name is on the screen.
Yeah.
Like that's the line is when it says directed by Jim Henson, that's when they go, does anyone even read these? Great timing. But yeah, I mean, I didn't watch this one, like I said, as much as a kid. Most of my Muppet consumption when I was a kid was Muppet Babies or reruns of the Muppet Show.
Yeah.
More so than any of the movies, at least until like the Christmas one went into rotation. And Muppet Family Christmas, actually, I watched a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I've got more nostalgia for that one than I do Christmas Carol, to be honest. Because I had
I'm right there with you on that one.
Yeah, I had a copy of that one. But, I've watched the Muppet movie quite a few times over the years. But the Great Muppet Caper is one I'll be honest, I'd probably only seen once or twice before this. So only certain like big moments, like the bicycle scene in the water ballet, like those were kind of the only things that really stood out in my memory. I couldn't remember any other details of it because it had been so long since I'd seen it, and didn't have it like ingrained in me like you guys did.
Mm-hmm.
So watching it this time was sort of like watching it for the first time. So I don't come to it with that like nostalgia that Gary's got or that you have, Todd. But let me tell you, watching it fucking killed me, cracked me up.
Yeah.
Like Gary said, every joke is funny. Like, I think this movie is pound for pound funnier than the Muppet movie. And I say that as someone who thinks the Muppet movie is one of the best comedies ever made.
Oh yeah.
Like this movie, just the jokes, they're so quick and they're just rapid fire. And a lot of times when you have rapid fire jokes, 4 out of 5 don't land. Like let's say a Mel Brooks movie. They pack in as many jokes as they can.
Yeah.
Some of those jokes don't land, and it's fine because the next one's coming in 30 seconds, and that one might land. It's fine. But this one, I feel like every joke lands. Like every joke, there's not a dud in the bunch that I can think of. And there's so many like running gags, like the Fozzie and Kermit being twins thing, the red-handed joke, even things like the bed trapping them.
Oh my God, the bed.
And then the light bulb falling out every time.
Perfect.
Yes.
It's so funny. Like I don't know. There's something about that that's really funny to me. And then the fact that they keep doing it makes it funnier. You know, like stuff like that it's just really good comedy writing.
Yeah.
No, it's like those jokes that you that you like tell like once and it's funny, and then if you say it again, it's like, okay, weird, 3 times, okay, but then like 4 times, it's like, oh my God, this is the funniest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, like, right. It's just really clever wordplay, really great delivery, because at this point, these guys have been working together for years and years, and their comic timing is just incredible. Now, overall, I will say, I think I like the Muppet movie more. There's something about it. I like the scrappiness of it. I think the songs are better in the Muppet movie. I think the songs here are very good. Don't get me wrong. I think Joe Raposo's songs here are good. But I don't think there's any of them are as iconic as some of the stuff that Paul Williams wrote for the Muppet movie. There's nothing here that compares to Rainbow Connection, in my opinion. There's nothing here that it's like, these aren't like earworms to me. They work very well in the context of the movie, which feels more like a classic Hollywood musical. But the ones in the Muppet movie, like I can just listen to that album as an album, and every song is gonna work on its own outside of the context of the movie. I think the song construction is just a little bit better because John Williams wrote pop songs. I mean, that's what
Paul Williams.
I'm sorry. What is it? I said John Williams.
You said John Williams.
John Williams, also a great songwriter.
Yeah, I was gonna say different score altogether.
Yeah. That would be something. Paul Williams wrote pop songs though, so like he knows how to write a hook that like really gets. And not that Joe Raposo doesn't. We know that a lot of his songs are catchy, but there's something about the songs in that first movie that are just like those are all timers, and the ones here, I'm not singing them as much afterwards. You know what I mean? With maybe the exception of that one that opens the movie. I think that's the catchiest one of the bunch. I think
Pretty great.
And again, all the songs in this are good. They're very good. They're just not iconic the way that the Paul Williams songs are.
Yeah, it's kind of like the catchy versus captivating. Like I'm captivated by Rainbow Connection. I'm captivated by Gonzo's song.
Yeah.
That's really good, Todd. Yeah, I think that is like a big difference. Like I feel like there are more it's weird. It's like pop versus like something, like the songs in the Muppet movie are long lasting, like just
Paul Williams
writing.
And he's capturing an essence of those characters in those songs.
Right.
Rainbow Connection is capturing who Kermit is. Gonzo's song is capturing an element of that character. Even Miss Piggy's song is doing that. Like they're all like character based in a way that the songs in this one are not. If that makes sense.
Because I think every song in the Great Muppet Caper is just a fun song.
It's just a fun song, and
poppy,
it might,
catchy.
And they don't move the plot along in the same way that they do in the Muppet movie either. Like moving right along is literally moving the plot along, and that song gets stuck in your head, but it's like a part of the story. Whereas in here, they're just entertainment sequences, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different utilization of the music. I just happen to like the stuff in the Muppet movie more. I just think they're more eternal, if that's not too pretentious of a word.
Evergreen versus like a slice of the time. And that makes sense.
And the other thing about this one that I think is one of the reasons why I think the first movie is a little bit better than this one is that the Great Muppet Caper lacks some of the heart of the first movie. It's a very fun romp, like the Great Muppet Caper is. It's a fun movie. I think that's fine. I think it's fine that this movie's not trying to do that, but I think that's what makes the first one more of like a classic to me than this one, is that it's got so much heart that this one doesn't really have. This one's just a fun time. And there's nothing wrong with that. Where in place of sentiment, the Great Muppet Caper substitutes silliness. I don't mind that. It's just, to me, it doesn't make it as big of a film experience.
Well, to go to that, when you're talking about, because I kind of loved connecting the canon for these movies, even though they completely stand apart. But like, if you go back to that very first scene with Bernie the agent and Kermit in the swamp, he's like, you could make millions of people happy. And so they get to Hollywood, they sign the rich and famous contract, and then they make a movie that just makes people happy.
Yeah, like that's this movie.
That's what this is. Yeah.
I agree. Like that's how I kind of viewed this movie. I was like, this is the movie. It's like they got their rich and famous contract in the first film.
Yep.
And they decide this is the first movie they made. And they did it as an homage to the Hollywood musicals of old, Yes. And I like that because this movie, The Great Muppet Caper, is, yes, the first movie was very meta. They had the whole screenplay thing and stuff. But this one is like, it's very knowingly a movie. Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the Muppets have always done the fourth wall breaking thing. But here, I mean, the movie, it literally starts with them singing about we're in a movie. Like, that's how the movie starts. And they're doing that on the street set that's also very clearly a set. Yeah. Like, it looks very artificial. And that's not a slight against it. I actually think that was intentional because this is an homage to classic Hollywood musicals, many of which were filmed on sound stages that had kind of an artificial look to them. Because there are scenes in this that are filmed out on location, but I think that there are certain sequences like that opening sequences that are purposely artificial looking, because it's in line with the kind of movies that they're trying to homage. So
I think I love that. Like when they drop into the city, it feels like a Universal Studio set.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and that's fun. But that's one thing I love about it. Yeah. That I just dig that feel. I think that going back to the hotel and
the Happiness Hotel is the same thing. It's very clearly a set. Like it feels like a set. And I like that about it because it makes me feel like I'm walking into like Muppet Vision 3D or something, where there's detail everywhere and it's cool, but it's very clearly like artificial. And
Right.
that's fun. I like that. I also do appreciate how weird this movie is. It's a little weirder than the first one. The first one's weird. I mean, it's the Muppets. They're all going to be a little bit weird. But I think this one's got a weirder sense of humor than the first one. Like the Kermit and Fozzie thing being twins, it's funny, yeah, but it's also like a weird joke for them to throw in there and keep doing over and over.
Yeah.
But it's also, you know what's just as weird? Charles Grodin and Diana Rigg being brother and sister. Like that,
Yeah.
that is just as unbelievable as Kermit and Fozzie being brothers.
Yeah.
It's really strange. I also like in terms of weirdness, Peter Falk's entire cameo does not need to be in the movie, does not do anything to move the plot along. It just exists for no reason other than the absurdity of it all.
I will tell you why it exists, because he was visiting the set that day.
Yeah, I love that. Did he ad-lib it?
Yeah. No, it was 100%. It was ad-libbed.
Because it's so bizarre.
Jim Henson met him. And then I was reading about that just today, that he was just like, oh, we're gonna put you in the movie. And they just throw it in there.
It's so funny. Because it has nothing to do with anything, but it's very funny, and Kermit's reaction is really great. He's like, that was 100% wrong. Like,
when I knew that and I was watching it, and when I was skimming through it again today, I was like, man, I wonder if because they said in the thing I was reading that he did ad-lib a lot of it. I was like, what if he did? What if it was just like, hey, Kermit's sad, he's sitting here, talk to him.
Yeah.
And then he just says all this stuff. And he's like,
great.
that's 100% wrong. Everything you just said is not how I feel.
It's really great. And for some reason, it's funnier because it's Peter Falk.
Yeah.
Right.
Because Peter Falk's just like, he's always Columbo to me. Like he's always, and he's even got the trench coat on and stuff in this, even though it's not a detective trench coat because he's selling stolen watches. But it's
I love to think that's exactly how it played out, and that Peter Falk also just went with it.
He just,
like, oh, really?
Yeah, and that he was already wearing a coat full of stolen watches.
Well, that's the thing. It's such a great button on the scene. You're talking to a frog who's not wearing a watch, let alone clothes,
no pants,
or have a wallet to give you any money. Like, but let's just go ahead and put this button on the scene of, hey, would you like to buy a watch?
Yeah, like the whole conversation was a setup to try to sell this frog a watch.
Yeah.
And then when Kermit turns him down, he's just like, all right, and he walks away.
Yeah. But then with the disdain of movie stars.
Right. But it's like the other cameos are like Peter Ustinov's cameo is really weird, and John Cleese's. It's like Henson just leaned into these performers' eccentricities and let them run wild.
Yeah,
kind of. It's like, hey, you want to come do a cameo for the movie? Just do whatever you want with it. This is the scene you're going to be in. Now you go with it. I'm hiring John Cleese for a reason, because I want him to do the John Cleese thing. And Peter Ustinov, I think, is one of the best guest hosts on the Muppet Show, period. I think his episode is fantastic. He's so funny in it. For a guy who's like a very big, proper British guy, he gets very, very silly. And I love that. I love that he's just having fun. And his cameo here is really funny to me. But anyway, I mean, I had a blast with this movie. It's not my favorite Muppet movie. I still think my favorite is probably the 1979 film. We'll see what happens when we go forward. I don't remember anything about Muppets Take Manhattan because I've probably seen it less than this one. So we'll see. But I think this one's going to go into rotation a lot more now, because I watched it twice this week. And me and Bunny, we both watched it, and she had not seen it since she was a kid either. And we were both just dying the whole, like laughing our asses off the whole time, because it is like legitimately a very funny movie.
Yeah.
Muppets are not like, the jokes are good.
I'm happy, I accept that I'm probably nostalgic and on the wrong side of history here, but it was just, everything about this was comfort to me when I watched it again.
Sometimes that happens though. And it doesn't mean that it's just because it's not everyone's favorite doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, this is a lot of people would probably pick Christmas Carol or the original Muppet movie over this one, but that doesn't mean this one's bad. It's just your personal experience with it. My favorite Indiana Jones movie is Temple of Doom, and most people would not choose Temple of Doom as their favorite Indiana Jones movie, but I watched that one the most when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Because I had it on VHS and I didn't have the other ones for some reason. I had
Yeah.
that one. So that's the one I watched, and I still love it to this day. I can fully admit that Raiders is probably a better movie. Last Crusade's probably a better movie, to be honest, but Temple's the one that I love the most.
Did you guys have the official VHS, or were these recorded off of TV?
My Temple of Doom was an official VHS.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think a lot of the stuff I had was recorded off of TV.
I was gonna say I actually did have the legitimate like old school VHS of the Great Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yeah.
I will say this too. What's exciting, in a dumb way for me, is that watching this one, when it unlocked that like whatever part of my brain, I already now remember songs from the Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yep.
Like Together Again.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, that one's classic. Yeah, that's a classic.
And all that. And
Somebody's
I
getting
remember
married.
I started remembering like Kermit's working in a diner because he doesn't have a memory. And he's like like the older's like, Frog, let me tell you something. People's is people's.
People's is people's.
And I'm like, all of it started like
It's
flooding
coming back.
back into
Yeah.
my brain.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's great.
But it's exciting. I'm pumped to watch that one next. But this movie, I think I was a little surprised at like just still how funny it felt to me and just how quick the wit was. I was happy that we emphasized the problems with the script, or like trying to work out the script and everything, because I was like, well, whatever happened there? I
They
feel
did
like
it.
they got there.
They nailed it. Yeah, they nailed it. And it wasn't about the plot. It was about creating a plot that was structured enough to string all these other gags on. And I think they did a great job with that, because the plot doesn't matter. I mean, in the end, it doesn't. It's just an excuse for the Muppets to be silly, you know? And for some of the humans around them to be silly, especially Charles Grodin. Like Diana Rigg doesn't really get to be silly, but most every other human on screen does.
Yeah. She gets some fun, snarky dialogue, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't say super silly. Yeah.
No.
We didn't even mention Janice and her one moment of like, look, Mom, it's my life, okay?
Yeah.
So if
Oh
I want to
man.
live on the
remember
beach and
that.
walk around naked.
I forgot we didn't
Yeah.
talk about that. Yeah.
About-
or just her
yeah.
getting to sunbathe.
Sunbathe,
you know?
yeah, sunbathe
Yeah,
there. Yeah,
yeah.
she's got a couple good moments. She's great. I mean, the Electra Mayhem is probably a little more prominent in this one than they are in the first movie.
Yeah.
Weirdly,
they have-
yeah, because they're
yeah.
only in like one real scene.
Well,
like,
two,
you know-
because they show back up in the desert.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's it's a small one. But in this one, they're pretty prominent, and they have a new member. They have old Lips playing the trumpet now.
Yeah.
Who, I don't remember who plays him.
He's the guy who takes over as Kermit.
Steve Whitmire.
Yeah, Whitmire.
Yeah, Steve Whitmire.
Gets it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the Great Muppet Caper was not quite the runaway success that the Muppet movie had been, only grossing half of what its predecessor had brought in at the box office. Still, it ended up earning more than $31 million in the USA alone, so it did pretty well, solidifying the Muppets' popularity as a kind of a worldwide pop culture phenomenon. So while more Muppet movies were sure to be coming down the line, I mean, you're not going to just stop making money. Right.
Yeah.
We're going to make more Muppet movies. But for now, Jim Henson was up to his ears in pre-production for his next film, the ambitious fantasy epic known as The Dark Crystal. And that, my friends, is where we're going to pick up on our next episode with the very interesting story behind the making of The Dark Crystal. And this one's going to be a weird one, because I know from talking to Gary and myself, never been a big fan of The Dark Crystal. So
Never liked it. Never liked it.
Go ahead and lump me in with that as well.
Oh, okay, good. So, and I know a lot of people do. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and I think that probably knowing how much thought and love went into it from Jim Henson might make me at least appreciate it more than I have in the past. So we'll see. I haven't watched it yet for this series. I'll probably be watching it in the next couple of days, but yeah, we'll see. The story behind it, though, very cool. So I'm excited for that. Also, kind of want to watch the Netflix show.
Yeah, I wanna dig into it, and I think we'll respect it more, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Just because of how much research we do in it, and I know that it carries this like weight in, again, to bring up the word nostalgia, but like so many people I don't know. It's lasted this long that Netflix made a show.
I'm very curious to kind of like track the popularity of it. Like, when did it become a thing that people started loving? You know, I don't know. I don't know.
I
Because
mean,
Labyrinth is the same way. Labyrinth did not do well on its initial release, and now it is arguably Jim Henson's most beloved film.
that's
So,
wild. It made me, I mean, not to get too far into Dark Crystal, but like, it made me think of when Disney Plus launched the Willow series. It was just kind of like, and again, that was kind of a flash in the pan, but it was just kind of like, what?
Interestingly enough, yeah, only one season. It was like
Yeah,
they were
it's
building
like,
off like a cult classic that
Yeah.
somehow had worked from the 80s,
Mhm.
and people still remembered fondly, but
Yeah, and I
didn't
can't
work.
help but think that they saw the Dark Crystal series come out from Netflix, and they're like, you know what? We're gonna roll the dice and see if that'll work for us too.
For what it's worth, I loved Willow and I loved that first season of the show and was disappointed when it got canceled.
Yeah.
guess what? I also don't like Willow.
Oh no.
Fuck is your
Sorry.
problem?
Sorry. Also, don't like the Goonies. Sorry.
Oh
You don't have to
no.
be sorry for that one. I'm not a fan of the
I
Goonies.
don't like the Goonies.
Not
Sorry.
with you on Willow, but I can get behind you on the Goonies and the Dark Crystal.
Yeah,
So
we'll see. But maybe I'll rewatch this. I bought the 4K of the Dark Crystal, so I'm sure it's going to look fantastic. I'm going to watch it, and probably a couple of times. So maybe I'll change my tune by the time we're here.
Well, I'm
next
excited,
time.
yeah, because it's definitely still been at the very least a decade since I've seen the Dark Crystal. So,
And I'm interested because like I'm a big D&D player, so the fantasy genre is becoming more prevalent in my circle, but I know it's probably not high on the list for either of you guys, would you say?
Not in general. In general, I don't. Even though the Lord of the Rings is probably like my favorite movie
Right, I was going to say
franchise.
save all but Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, but in general, fantasy stuff does not appeal to me. No, there's too much lore and bullshit that I have to remember.
There's a lot.
Like,
Yeah, there's a lot.
It gets boring to me.
For sure.
So, I had to read the Bible a lot when I was a kid. I had enough of that shit. So and so beget so and so. I don't need to know all this.
You're right.
Anyway, I think that's it for this week. Oh, before we go, because I forgot to do this at the beginning of the show, we have a new subscriber to thank for Cinema Shock Plus.
What? Yeah.
Lucy Lawson, welcome to the club. I kept wanting to say Lucy Lawless, which would also be fucking cool.
Makes sense.
But it's also cool that Lucy Lawson has joined the Cinema Shock Plus club. So thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
Thanks, Lucy.
We really do appreciate it. And anyone else who wants to sign up for Cinema Shock Plus, head to cinemashock.net/plus, where you can get access to extended versions of these episodes. It'll have like further viewing, where we give our recommendations on movies that you compare with, in this case, The Great Muppet Caper. Also, our Somebody Needs a Nap segment, where Gary talks all about reviews that he found on the internet. Star Trek stuff, which spoiler, we didn't do Star Trek this time, but there is a bonus segment. Please join Cinema Shock Plus if you want to A, support the show, B, get all kinds of bonus content. We're putting out, we're always like brainstorming more content. The entire first season of Twin Peaks Fire Shock with Me is out. We'll be working on season 2 soon. We've got some other fun ideas in the works as well for bonus content. So there's all kinds of stuff you can get there. Anyway, that's my plug for Cinema Shock Plus and my thank you for Lucy. Thank you, Lucy. And where can you guys be found on the internet for anyone who wants to follow you?
I am at This Is Gary Horn, all spelled out.
If you like Star Trek, come follow my podcast at Computer Resume on all the things. If you like Dungeons and Dragons, I host a monthly actual play. You can follow that at D's20 Live on Instagram. I also host monthly comedy shows here in Greenville, South Carolina, and we'll be hitting the road this summer as I make my way to Trek Long Island. But you can follow me at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
I am at Justin_Bishop on Letterboxd and Instagram. You can also find me on Blue Sky. You can also find me on Substack now, which is a new thing that we're trying out. So the show's on there as well. We're going to probably be throwing some supplemental content up there in the near future. You can also find the show at cinema_shock in most of the places. And, of course, cinemashock.net, your home for all things Cinema Shock. If you like the show, If you like the Muppets, if you like David Lynch, if you like Jodorowsky and David Cronenberg and all this other stuff, or you have other friends who do, rate, review, share the show any way that you can. That's the best way to get this in front of other people, and it would really help us out a lot. And until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
The children are grown, the pets are dead, the mother's been discharged, and Johnny has the keys.